Okay, welcome back to the 4-3 notes. I wanted to go over this proof with you guys just so that we kind of know how to do this. And what we're given is we're given all this information about congruent statements in this figure over here. And we want to prove that triangle ABD, and that's this triangle here, is congruent to CBD. So CBD. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark this figure over here to the right with congruent statements based on what I'm given here. So the first thing that it says is that AB is congruent to CB. So this segment is congruent to this segment. So I'm going to come over here and mark that with a single line, okay, single tick mark. Okay, and then it says that AD is congruent to CD. So let me go ahead and mark that. And because that's a different segment, I'm going to mark that with 2 tick marks. Okay, and this has 2 tick marks. Okay, and then we know that angle ABD, so that's this angle here, angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. So let me zoom in here and draw that real quick. That these 2 angles are congruent. Let me put an arc mark here and an arc mark there, okay? So I know that those are congruent, all right? And then I know that angle, then I know that angle ADB, okay, is congruent to CDB. So ADB is congruent to CDB. And guys, let's go ahead and let's zoom in on that and mark that off as well. Okay, that this angle here, I'm going to put 2 arc marks on that. Okay, so we know that those are congruent. All right, so then we've got those. All right, so now, all right, we need to, we've marked that all up, and we want to show that this triangle is congruent to this triangle, okay? And we don't have too much else left to do, but let's go ahead and write out our proof, okay? And I'm going to come here, and I'm going to write out our statements. So statements, and then reasons. Okay, so we've got a lot of given statements we need to write down. So the first statement I'm going to write down is AB, that segment is congruent to CB, okay, and that's given to us. All right, we also have, let me just write all these down, AD is congruent to CD, okay, and that's given as well, okay. And then we've got that angle, our third statement is that angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. Okay, and that's also given. And then our fourth statement is angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. Okay, and that's also given. Okay, so now what I want to talk about here is that I know that I have 2 pairs of angles that are congruent, okay? So what that tells me is that these third angles have to be congruent, okay? So the conclusion that I draw is that I notice I've got 2 pairs of congruent angles, so that must mean that my third pair of angles have to be congruent, okay? So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to write that in statement 5. Okay, and I'm going to write that angle A is congruent to angle, and I think that was C. Hold on, I got to go back and check. Angle C, yeah. Okay, so angle A is congruent to angle C. Okay, and so that's the reason that I can write that is because of that's the third angles theorem. Okay, the third angles theorem. Okay, and so because of that, because of the third angles theorem, I can then say that angle A is congruent to angle C. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to label that with 3 tick marks. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, Okay, so now I've said that all corresponding angles are congruent, and I have two pairs of congruent segments. But the last segment is interesting because that's a segment that is shared amongst each of each triangle, and that's segment BD. So what I'm going to do in order to make this all work over here, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say in my sixth step that segment BD is congruent to itself, segment BD. Okay, and that is the reflexive property. Reflexive property. Okay, so now, guys, what we have here is that we have all of our corresponding segments are congruent. Okay, I've got this segment's congruent to that, this segment's congruent to that. I've got that A is congruent to C. I've got that these two angles are congruent and these two angles are congruent. And they share a common side, so that piece is congruent to itself. So what I can do here is I can make the claim now that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD, okay? And so let's come in here and let's write that last statement down. And that's the statement of, in number 7, that triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD. Okay, and that's by that property of corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So I went ahead and we can just write CPCTC, all right? And that's an acronym for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so we're done. Okay, so we ended with the proof statement, okay, and we started with the given statements, okay. So, you know, you always start with your given statements. Okay, what are you given? What conclusions can we draw? And we want to arrive at this last statement and use the logic going through, okay. So that's all I've got for this part 2 of the 4.3 notes. So hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully this is relatively simple, but we're going to continue doing proofs, and I hope that that's all right with you. So, all right, thanks. Bye.